Hey everyone! So a couple of weeks ago I was scrolling through my news feed and I came across a story on Kotaku which was about a $100,000 gaming scandal that had rocked the retro PC gaming world. So I did a little digging and the story is quite incredible but also sad at the same time because it affects quite a few people and there are quite a few victims that have come out of this. And it all points to one man from Italy. And even WATA, the video game grading company, which is, a little bit shady in itself, is also involved in this story. And unfortunately, people are still continuing to find these counterfeit games within their own collections. So this story starts with a man named Stephane, who's part of the PC retro gaming community. Very early PC games from the 80s and early 90s. And he's one of the small group of people that cracked this case wide open. And so when he received his particular games, he didn't realize straight off the bat that they were actually counterfeit. But it's because he's such a diligent collector, which is where he was able to find out that these were fake games. And it's quite impressive to see the lengths that he went to and goes to when he sort of verifies these types of games. So Stephane had for many years been searching for a video game called Chambers of Zenobia. So this particular game was written in 1981 from a student who was about 14 at the time named Stephen Sachs, and it was published by a small video game company outside of Oregon. And according to Stephane, this game had only sold a few hundred copies, but wasn't a particularly sought after game, but it was just one that's always been on his radar, and I assume one that he probably played as a kid, which is why he really wanted it. So yeah, Stephane had been searching for this game since 2003. So in July of 2021, Stephane found out through another collector named David, whom Stephane often traded with, that a complete copy of Zenobia was going to be sold in a lot of games. But then David found out that this lot was being held for someone else. So Stephane asked David if he could tell this seller that he would be able to make a good trade for Zenobia or the lot. And over the months, through a lot of back and forth, the game finally became available, or the lot of games became available, and David was able to sort of strike a deal between the two of them and make a trade. And so David was basically acting as the middleman between the two. So Stephane sent his lot of games that he was going to trade to David, and then the mysterious trader, who was actually based in Italy, would send his games to David, and then David would send on the games to Stephane and the mysterious trader. And David would receive a token of appreciation from each one of the traders. And then Stephane received his games and he was over the moon, he was ecstatic, he was so happy about it, they looked great. He had finally gotten his game. And Stephane actually did a big write-up about this on the website CGW Museum. And he writes on it, "I finished work later that afternoon and immediately afterwards posted a rather enthusiastic thread on Twitter about the find. I also emailed author Stephen Sachs, he's the one that created Zenobia when he was 14, whom I managed to contact years ago but who unfortunately had not kept copies of his games. He was also extremely happy about the news, even posting it to his LinkedIn account." And I don't have to tell you, these games were obviously forgeries, but that's probably the most saddest part of this whole story, because not just how excited and happy that Stephane was for finally getting his game, but the fact that he messaged Stephen Sachs, the creator of the game, who had lost his own copies, and he just heard news that one of his physical copies had come up in the wild, and this guy that he'd been contacted with had found the game, and he was excited, he could see the game that he created so many years ago and posted on his LinkedIn account. Everybody was ecstatic about it. And that is so sad, really, really sad that it turned out to be a counterfeit game. And it was at that point where this story takes a real sharp turn and opens up a huge can of worms. So as I said before, Stephane is super diligent when it comes to collecting, and he sends his game files off to an Apple II archivist for verification and for posting on the Internet Archives. And on the 20th of May 2022, he got back that the game files were not authentic. The Chambers of Zenobia disc contained cracked files which were widely available online, and it was a similar story with another game that was also part of the lot. So Stephane then sent 2 of the game files to another expert named John Morris, who was an expert on floppy disks. And John Morris concluded that neither disk was authentic and that both were written by the exact same source. So Stephane then went back to all the boxes and inserts and pamphlets and everything that he received and started examining them quite thoroughly. And that's when he found a lot of discrepancies between everything. And this included labels that appeared to be cut by hand. Some labels weren't the correct measurements compared to authentic labels. Stephane even discovered a faint watermark from a paper company that wasn't used by the game publisher. Basically, he took a photo and just saw the faintest lettering, and he wasn't sure what that was, so he upped the contrast more and more, and it came up as a paper company. And he did some research and found that the game publisher never used this type of paper. So this is how thorough he was in investigating this. And the hang tabs looked like they'd been cut by hand. Ink didn't appear correct, and some of the paper and staples looked new, not 40 years old. And there's plenty more evidence that I'll leave a link below to Stephane's entire story, which includes all of the detailed photos. So the next day, Stephane went back to David and told him everything that he'd found. And he wanted to know more about this mysterious collector and where he got his games from. And so David asked him, and the collector said that he had found a lot of Apple II video games, but he was already downsizing his own collection, so decided to just sell them off. And David actually managed to get the original photo of the lot of games that was originally posted and sent it back to Stephane. And Stephane had a look at it, and he realized that the games in the photo didn't quite match up to what he received. He could see small differences. So the guy that traded these games from Europe probably owned these games, made forgeries of them, and then sent them to Stephane. And so David and Stephane are sort of chatting back and forth, comparing notes, and then David is also fully convinced that Stephane has been scammed, or they both pretty much have. And he just replies, "Fuck." And so this is where David finally reveals who the collector is, based in Italy. And it's a man named Enrico Ricciardi. And David says to Stephane, "I think you know him." And Stephane replies, "Oh yes, I know him." So Stephane and Enrico knew each other over Twitter, and they had sent messages back and forth over the years. Enrico Ricciardi, he's a fashion photographer based in Italy. His Instagram shows off his photography. He has a website dedicated to it, and based on interviews, that's pretty much how he's made a living for most of his life. But his Twitter account often shows off his gaming collection and his interest in early PC games. And Enrico, up until that point, was also a well-known and well-respected part of the retro PC gaming community, and was even a moderator of the Facebook group Big Box PC Game Collectors. And a lot of people had traded with him over the past 7 years, at least since 2015. So David contacted Enrico and said, "Look, there's a problem with these 2 game files. They're not authentic at all." And strangely enough, Enrico actually knew that Stephane was the one that purchased these games, but never said anything, because when Stephane posted up this game lot on Twitter, when he was all excited about it, especially his Zenobia game, Enrico actually contacted Stephane about it, but didn't reveal that he was the one that traded the games with him. So really weird there. And so when David had presented Enrico with this evidence, Enrico quickly said, "Oh look, I had no idea these were fake. I'll send back his games and he can keep them." And Stephane was just really glad that he could get his games back. And unknowingly to Stephane, during all of his own drama, another man named Kevin Ng, who is the administrator on the Big Box PC Game Collectors Facebook group, had also received a few games from Enrico Ricciardi. And he noticed straight off the bat that these games were probably counterfeit games. And so straight away he messaged Enrico, and Enrico was like, or alluded to one of the games probably being fake, and then that he should destroy it, but had no idea that he'd sent him a fake game. But this raised like red flags for Kevin. So he decided to reach out to other members of the Facebook group that he could see had traded with Enrico over the past. And after some investigation, found that a lot of members had actually received counterfeit video games, all from Enrico. And in May 2022, Stephane actually got wind of this investigation going on in the Facebook group, got in contact, shared his information and the evidence that he had found. And so far, up to that point, the group administrators say that they've found at least $100,000 worth of suspected counterfeit transactions. So on the 29th of May, the group decided to go public, and within a couple of days, it actually started generating some big news such as Kotaku, PC Gamer, and a really good in-depth article on Ars Technica. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it was actually found out that one of these games was graded by WATA, the video game grading company, which I find a little funny because I'm not a big fan of them, but it's sad for the person that got their game graded. So what has Enrico Ricciardi had to say about all of this? Well, surprisingly, quite a lot. And in fact, he says that he is the victim in all of this and not the perpetrator. And he blames somebody and I swear I'm not making this up, he blames someone called Mr. X. And I'll talk about Mr. X in a little bit. And in an interview with Ars Technica, at most he says he's guilty of passing on forgeries that he's obtained unknowingly from other people. And in another interview with PC Gamer, he talks about how he started collecting in the late 90s, he's amassed a huge collection, he's sold off a few games, and the people that he bought those games off, he doesn't have any of the contact details, he doesn't know where he purchased the games. And Kevin Ng also spoke to Ars, and he questioned how someone could have so much bad luck from receiving multiple fakes from multiple people and then going on to sell them off without knowing that they were all forgeries. And he also says that Enrico was one of the people that you would go to if you questioned whether or not something was fake. So if you saw an eBay listing, you would go to Enrico and say, hey Enrico, what do you think of this? Do you think it's legit? And there's even a Facebook post which shows Enrico calling out an eBay listing saying that it's clearly a forgery. But Enrico has his own explanation for this. So he tells Ars, now I am 62, tired, stressed by 3 years of COVID, and I'm paying for the decrease of my skills in recognizing forgeries, maybe my eyes too. And when it comes to creating the forgeries, he says that he is not Steven Spielberg. He's basically saying to create this level of forgery of a counterfeit game, you need to be on the level of Steven Spielberg. But if you go and have a look at these forgeries, like, yeah, they're quite good, but you just need arts and crafts skills. You don't need to be Steven Spielberg to make them. And it's in the Ars article when Enrico starts talking about Mr. X. So he says that over the last 6 or 7 years, this figure, the shadowy figure named Mr. X, had sent him games and they'd do all the transactions over email, and the games were coming from an anonymous PO box. But once all this sort of exploded, he no longer has the email from Mr. X, like it doesn't work anymore. And when Ars asked him for evidence of the correspondence between him and this Mr. X guy, he says that his lawyer advised him not to share it, not to share any of the emails. And when asked like the name of his lawyer, he refused. He just refused to give him the name of the lawyer, which is weird because in this huge situation, when people are making allegations against you, you would want your lawyer working through all of this. And I'm sure if you had a really good lawyer, he would be advising you not to do these kinds of interviews and talking about someone named Mr. X. I don't know. And another statement he made in the Ars article, he says, "After this nightmare, I've decided to stop collecting it all, some of the rarest ever collected. When I die, I'll ask my wife to burn it." So when he dies, he wants his wife to burn his entire games collection. Like, not give it to charity or anything, you know, just burn it all. Like, that's just what he's thinking. And so did Enrico actually make $100,000 from selling forgeries? Well, Kyle Orland, who did the Ars article and did all the interviews, he says that a lot of these transactions were actually just trades. So he wasn't receiving any money from the transactions. It was just trading one game for the other. And others have suggested that someone has obtained a legitimate copy of a game, have made a forgery of it, traded that forgery for another legitimate copy, and then so on and so on. And then that person has just built up a big, legitimate collection for themselves. And that's sort of what the thinking is. So it wasn't really money motivated. It was just more building up their own collection. And Stephane says in his big write-up, he says that it's upsetting in a community that, in the overall scheme of things, is relatively niche, small enough so that most people know each other, at least to some extent, and where relationships are generally quite friendly and transactions are largely executed on trust. And that, for me, is probably the saddest part of the story, because a lot of these gaming communities, they're built on a mutual love of video games or PC games from the early 80s and 90s. And these are usually games from their childhood, so they're all just trying to get back that childhood nostalgia that they had when they were growing up, and just enjoying the gaming community in general. And that's why I love collecting video games and all sorts of other crazy crap. So it is really disappointing that someone in this kind of community, that people have really trusted and they've traded with over the years and conversed with over the years, for them to just betray all of that. It's quite disgusting. Well, that's my take on it anyway. Bit of a crazy story, and if you've gotten this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments of this, and if you are worried about video game collection and counterfeit games, there are plenty of videos out there that teach you how to look out for certain things, from PC games to the Mega Drive Genesis to Nintendo 64. So check those out, and hope you enjoyed, guys. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye.